Welcome to the Creative Corrosion Podcast. This show exists to help makers, doers, movers, and shakers bust through the rust of creative stagnation. We cover tools and mindset shifts to build the creative practice of your dreams. I'm your host, Val McDaniel. Let's jump into this episode. Behavior scientists estimate that the average adult makes more than 35,000 decisions a day. So we go through life sort of on autopilot to perform those actions. In order to keep our sanity and avoid burnout, it's intrinsic that we make most decisions using thought patterns that we've already established. However, there's a problem when we're using our commonly accessed knowledge. Not on day-to-day decisions like walking, but when we apply that same thinking strategy to challenges in our personal and professional lives. When we become reliant on learned thinking patterns, it can be really difficult to challenge our assumptions or to make any significant change. This reliance is why so many people recommend thinking outside the box. Thinking outside the box usually leads to a group brainstorming activity in professional settings. But there are three main issues with the standard practice of a brainstorming activity. 1. Brainstorming values quantity over quality, and that often produces watered-down solutions. 2. Brainstorming is often inequitable. The ideas from those with extroverted personalities or reputations of being the most creative are often overvalued, and brainstorming can lead to a danger zone for falling into a groupthink mentality. 3. Brainstorming produces many shallow ideas, but doesn't provide steps to venture from idea to implementation. You open yourself to a whole world of ideas when you think outside the box. But the problem is most ideas aren't really feasible or offer a reasonable solution. So thinking outside the box is a well-intended fallacy, and brainstorming is far too vague and unstructured to be really helpful. But by using a design thinking mindset, we can add in the much-needed structure into out-of-the-box thinking. Despite its name, design thinking isn't just for artists or designers. It's for anyone who needs to find innovative solutions. Design thinking celebrates collaboration and curiosity and having an open mind. It's a thought process that relies on observation and empathy, and it is iterative and hands-on. Using a design thinking philosophy in our personal decisions allows us to look outside our learned thinking patterns without fear. Probably one of the best design thinking processes I've found is called a design sprint. The design sprint was invented at Google Ventures by Jake Knapp. And this process has helped organizations like Slack and Medium and Google Nest to achieve successful problem solving. And there's tons of articles and resources online on how to perform a sprint. Jake Knapp even wrote a book about it. So my goal with this episode isn't to reiterate already widely available information. What I want to do is help you augment this award-winning process to your personal thinking strategy. The design sprint includes 5 steps: understand, ideate, decide, prototype, and test. We're going to break down each step and make it personal. At the beginning of your sprint, you want to understand the issue at hand fully. Set a long-term goal, create an action list, and decide the highest value action to target your problem. We'll focus on this action item for the rest of the exercise. But first, let's understand. To fully understand the problem, you need to discover your pain points. Some really great questions to ask yourself are, 1, why do I want to make this change? And what circumstances contributed to this problem? You should always approach these questions with empathy and try to avoid falling into blaming yourself. The whole goal of this exercise isn't to get emotional about a situation, but to move forward with understanding. So the next phase of the design sprint is to ideate. And our next step would be to establish a long-term goal. So a couple of questions to help you out would be, what's my desired outcome? Or how can I turn this problem into an opportunity? And with these questions, we're aiming to get your mind to think into the future, kind of travel there. And once we can envision that goal, we can work backward from our desired outcome. And to work backward, we'll have to create a list of action steps on how to get there. So this step might require a little bit of research. For example, if your desired outcome or your goal is a new career, but your problem is a lack of skill, you might consider the requirements on how to get a job in that field, and then create a list of action items to obtain those qualifications. So once you have your list of action items, it's time to move on to the next phase of our sprint. And that phase is to decide. Now it's time to decide which action item is going to contribute the most to your solution or goal. Sometimes action lists aren't linear things, and prioritizing the highest value thing can quickly propel you forward. It can be a little challenging to determine the best action, so during this part of your process, it might be helpful to get an outside opinion. Maybe contact someone who has already achieved what you're working for. So once you've made your decision about an action list item, the next step would be to prototype. And in a traditional design sprint, the prototype phase would be done by a big team, and it's usually in conjunction with a product design or user testing. And in this part of the process, they would make low-fidelity prototypes or wireframe sketches of apps and user flows. But we can use the prototype phase in our exercise to take the first step towards your chosen action item. If we take our example from earlier about finding a new career, this could look like taking an online course or checking out a book about a skill you need to learn. The prototype phase is a way to take action while keeping cost and time invested at a minimum. Now we've made it to the last step of our augmented design sprint. And that step is to test. It's time to test what you accomplished in the prototype phase. The test phase of the sprint is vital. You'll gain insight into how to move forward or where you should invest more of your time. So from our example earlier, you could take the knowledge you obtained from your course and test it out on a project, or see if that new knowledge could land you an interview. I hope this episode gave you a few new ideas on redesigning your decision-making process. I hope we can start using design thinking to help us break free from our learned thinking patterns. If we use methods like design sprints for our big decisions, we can work more equitably with our professional teams and more confidently on our own. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show and would like to connect further, be sure to follow us on Instagram at Creative Corrosion Podcast.